Yeah, go ahead. Got it. I'm already on it. I'm already working on it. What time do you want them there, though? Got it. Got it. We'll call them in now. So on this orbit, Tyler will stop and look at these guys down here because they're starting to throw stuff at each other here. So just want to make sure we're in position here. Yeah, we're coming around right now. The skirmish line is still not moved. The officers are just holding their position, and there's still some throwing of objects between the two groups here. So right in here is good, Tyler. Sure. And so that's where the skirmish line is. And then if you look back over here, Michelle, at Charles E. Young is where the staging area is for law enforcement. Good morning for those who are tuning in. We're live over UCLA for continuous coverage here. And the law enforcement officers have now started to line up a skirmish line in order to control the protest here at UCLA. Large contingency of CHP and LAPD here on the UCLA campus. So far we see one side of the groups continuing to try to tear down the barrier that was made to keep the groups separate. So one side is trying to hold their side and keep their barrier up, and another side is trying to tear it down. You can see here there's a number of individuals tearing away at this fence little by little, trying to make way into where the encampment is. Oh, here's a big confrontation between the two groups. A lot of punches being thrown. And it's all one group just trying to hold their stance, and another group just little by little trying to tear down the fence that's in between both factions. You do see a number of individuals that are stepping in to try to keep the peace here. This is not law enforcement. These are individuals that are there on both sides trying to step in and stop the fighting from happening. We still have the police skirmish line is still in place. They have not moved in and affected any type of operation other than just a show of force here. Again, LAPD and CHP both on scene. And here we go again, another group. They're fighting over the fence line. They're trying to just maintain it. Little by little, tearing this fence apart, trying to break the actual barrier between both groups. Again, piece by piece, they're tearing away at this barrier, and you'll see little breakouts of fights happening, of people trying to maintain the barrier and others trying to break it down. And here you see small little skirmishes breaking out left and right, mainly dealing with taking down the barrier in between. You'll see it pop up, it'll be a quick flash, and then it'll go away. You do see a lot of the, what I would call, protesters that are policing themselves and trying to keep the peace. You see a number of individuals stepping up in a more or less of a leadership role, trying to stop the fighting between the two groups. And this has been the case over the course of the night. There's been small clashes between the groups, but this is the first time we've seen an official show of force from LAPD and CHP, both on scene. Heavy, heavy presence here. And again, we've seen these pop up organically throughout the night where people from both sides are now engaging in some conversation, nonviolent conversation, just trying to calm and quell the violence from happening. And it just happens sporadically throughout these little clashes that you'll see people step up, starting to have some conversation between each other to try to stop the violent confrontation. So you see that a lot of people have maintained and stepped up as leaders in this situation. And you see it begins to calm down when that happens, but there's still a number of agitators that'll jump in and start fighting again. So hopefully we'll see something from law enforcement here shortly. We're listening to them, and they are setting up for as calm and as non-violent of a procedure as possible. And you see they're just maintaining a show of force here on the UCLA campus. It seems like whenever these little conversations start up, that's when things start to calm down, and the majority of the group is paying attention to the conversation between the two groups, and we're not seeing that sporadic jump in and try to tear the fence down. Most of the side of the confrontation is gathered right here where we're looking, and a lot of the pro-Palestinian side is still sporadically amongst the tents, but there's obvious tensions are high there. They're along their fence. This fence was constructed just with construction materials. They have barricades, large things of plywood, anything they could find to try to construct something to keep the two sides apart. And you see little by little people been tearing it down. It's interesting. They've been grabbing whatever they can, and then they've been placing it in a number of areas. Here's a number of areas where you could see a lot of the makeshift materials are set up where they're bringing it back to try to take it away from this actual stronghold they have here in the line they have here of these tents. So at the moment, you see a peaceful conversation between the two groups, and hopefully that they can have some sort of resolve between each other. Oh, here you see some of the members from this side are bringing plywood back to try to reinforce their line here. So we have it happening on both ends. There's plywood or barriers being taken away, and they're being brought back and reinforced. So interesting situation here where I'll widen out so you can see the entire area here. We're still at UCLA. For those just joining us, we're live at UCLA, where the conflict between pro-Palestinian and Israeli supporters is still underway throughout the night here at UCLA. And again, a large presence of police, both CHP and LAPD here on the UCLA campus. Still no movement in by law enforcement. It's just a presence here at this time. They're showing a large presence of both units. I understand there's also a contingency of LA County sheriffs that have just arrived into the staging. So we'll see what the plan is once they begin to try to move in and stop the violent protest here and see what they can do to resolve it. So far, a lot of these little conversations have actually calmed the situation down. You see them backing off once we have some of these conversations. Again, for the time being, if you're just joining us live here, we're at UCLA, protests between pro-Palestinian Israeli supporters, and we're seeing small little outbursts of conflict between the two groups where there is a line, a fortified line, that's blocking the pro-Palestinian group that are here in tents. They've set up a line of makeshift plywood, barriers, whatever they could find. I've seen different pallets, whatever they can use to separate the two groups here. And you'll see the pro-Palestinian group will make attempts to break that barrier down whenever they can. So we'll see people run up, take a piece of plywood, take a piece of just whatever they had constructed there, and they're running it back to an area that was open for them back over here. But now the difference being we see a large police presence. LAPD, CHP on scene here on the campus at UCLA, and they begin to just have a show of force. No interaction from law enforcement yet, but a very big show of force here. Yep. We're going to orbit around and see if we could see how fortified this actual wall is. And like I said, there's mediation happening by leaders of the group themselves. We see a number of these conversations just pop up, and whenever these conversations pop up, it just seems like that calms the situation for a moment. So it's between the groups themselves, no law enforcement involved there, just groups that are actually showing up, or persons or leaders of the group showing up and having conversations, which has caused a little bit of calm in the situation, where just a few moments ago we were seeing a number of little clashes between the two groups, and that seems to have calmed down for the moment at least. Law enforcement still standing by. And you can see now, here's what I was talking about. This is just a makeshift wall that has been created to have a bit of separation between the pro-Palestinian tent city on the campus here and the Israeli supporters. So we'll see how long that lasts, and we'll see many of them, like I said, talking amongst themselves and sort of calming the situation to stop the actual violence between the two. Oh, and here we see LAPD and CHP now making a move, now moving in. Where their skirmish line has increased, and they're very slowly making their way towards the actual area where people are protesting. So as we come around in this orbit, we'll be able to see LAPD and CHP moving in to what we're going to call the area in the quad here. And Tyler, if we can, let's just set back up over the center there so we can see it happen. We're coming around here, guys. Excuse us on this orbit. And back live on the quad at UCLA. CHP officers, LAPD officers now moving in to disperse the crowd here. Still don't see any arrests being made. They're more or less corralling the group and pushing them in certain areas. So we'll see what happens here. I see very diplomatically they're pointing and trying to move them to a certain direction. I did see a number of CHP and LAPD officers with plastic cuffs, and they were talking about an area where they take people into custody. However, nobody's seen being taken into custody yet. They're just kind of moving in and corralling the people in a certain direction. And the small group we saw conversating before has now moved into the center as the CHP and LAPD begin to move in. I also see mixed in members of the UCLA Public Safety, their police department, also on scene, and they are seen inside the center of that corral and moving the crowd to the west here. Let's see if we could go around again there, Tyler. See on the other side of the tree. It looks like they're moving that group all into the same area. here we go, slowly and methodically, CHP just moving in and corralling the group. It's kind of difficult to tell. There's a lot of people just kind of on the sidelines, media, people there just taking pictures. So it's kind of hard to decipher who are actually protesters and who are here just kind of documenting the event. But it's slow and persistent are the CHP and LAPD. They moved in about 100 feet and started moving all the group towards a certain area. So we'll see, and you can see a number of these officers all equipped with plastic cuffs, waiting to see where this goes. And you see them slowly but surely making their way towards that makeshift barrier that I was mentioning earlier here in the middle of the quad. So many of the pro-Israel protesters or group have all kind of gone to one area. The CHP has cordoned them into that area, and no clash with police so far. It's been very cordial. We've seen the CHP just kind of point them in the direction they wanted to go, and I haven't seen any type of violence or conflict with any of the groups and the law enforcement officers. And again, LAPD seems to be holding the exterior of the perimeter here, and LAPD, a large uniform contingency here, keeping everybody out of the quad, where you have CHP officers in their skirmish line moving into the quad, also with some support of LAPD officers, and they're very methodically moving in to have people removed from the quad. Quite a different contrast from just hours ago, where the two groups were involved in a lot of fights between both. Go ahead and orbit to the other side, Tyler. See what we can see. A lot of them have gathered over here in this corner, so we can see if we can get around there, see what's going on. Yeah, keep coming around. Let's look in this corner over here. This is where a lot of the individuals have gone in that corner. So we could just keep coming around. There we go. I just want to see where they're going over there. Yeah, a number of people. As the police department moves forward, a number of these people are just walking out of a gate here and getting out of the way. Oh, and looks like no, right in here, Tyler's good. And And just as I talked about a lot of these skirmishes being over, here's another one that's erupted between different sides of the factions here. And, you know, the main thing is a lot of people just trying to keep the peace, but the law enforcement is still moving in. So again, if you're just joining us, we're live over UCLA, where LAPD and CHP officers have begun to break up the protest between pro-Palestinian and Israeli support members. They're going to push through the park now is what we're hearing. So let's see what happens to the majority of these people that are still here. Let's go. We can make a quick orbit, Tyler. Let's see what's happening here. There was a little bit of people moving around here. News media. So there's another fight that's going to start over here. So we just cruise back around, yeah. Oh, here comes CHP. They're moving in, closing the gap here. So we'll stay up here, Tyler. Very methodically, CHP moving in to close the gap and move people out. Still no big arrest by CHP. I've seen them communicating with individuals and telling them to move along, but no arrest being seen so far. Again, CHP here, large contingency, backed up by LAPD. So you see the first skirmish line is CHP officers, and then right behind them is LAPD in there for support. And LAPD also with a large skirmish line holding the perimeter of the quad. So that way no people can come behind the initial skirmish line. They started out and stayed there for quite a while, and now they're moving in and slowly closing the gap and letting the protesters move out. So as you can see, even CHP has now closed the gap a little bit, and now they're encountering some of the first groups that are not wanting to leave. So we'll see what happens here. Still yet to see any arrests being made by CHP or LAPD. So this is the first kind of group I've seen them come up to where they're refusing to leave. And you can see CHP has kind of widened the gap, and they've closed in on certain areas just to try to clear it out. They've given people the opportunity to leave so far, have yet to see any arrest, but we'll see. This is kind of the first clash I've seen. So here we are, CHP moving in, and it's hard to, right now it's hard to decipher who's the news media, who's covering this, and who's actually still here protesting. You see a number of people from a number of outlets, or a number of people that are self-proclaimed media that are out here just on the scene with various camera types. And so now it's going to get interesting. CHP has to kind of identify who's who in the zoo, and they're tightening up their skirmish line to move in and push these people away. Oh, and here comes LAPD. They're kind of stepping in too. They've been here more just reinforcing CHP's skirmish line. And so you see CHP now, they've made a move where they've kind of tightened in, and now they're pushing everybody to the west end of the quad here. And more or less just clearing this whole quad area. And again, if you're just joining us live on ABC, we are at UCLA, where we're witnessing a clash between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli supporters here in the quad at UCLA. We have CHP and LAPD skirmish lines. They're on the scene trying to clear this area. Just hours ago, supporters from both sides were involved in a bit of a conflict between each other. As you can see, there's a line of tents here. This line of tents was actually created to make a division between the two groups. And there was a number of just plywood, whatever they could find. Plywood I saw pallets, whatever can be used to create that division was set up here to have a division line or a wall between both groups, and they begin to be torn down by the opposition group. So they begin to come in and tear down pieces. What they were doing is they were grabbing pieces and actually taking them away and putting them over here. And they were actually throwing them and trying to remove them. So it's interesting to see CHP has moved in now, peacefully removing a lot of the protesters. We've yet to see any arrest. We do see also LAPD with their contingency here moving in, and I haven't seen any acts of violence towards the police. The police department has been very diplomatic and coming in and moving the crowd. they've made a number of announcements saying, hey, leave or be arrested, leave or be arrested. And they're very slowly and methodically moving the protesters to an area where they're off the quad. So as you can see, CHP has made a corridor here where they're allowing people to leave peacefully. So they've made announcements, they've allowed people to leave along this corridor and exit the quad. So they've shut down most of the quad, they're closing it down and allowing people to leave along the west side of the quad there. So the number of people that were here earlier that were this is where quite the number was pushed to initially when CHP entered. They have now been allowed to walk away without being arrested through this corridor here that CHP and LAPD has created to exit the quad here. So we're seeing a lot of the members that were here. There's still a little bit of a contingency here. There's some conversations going on here in the middle between CHP and some of the pro-Palestinian protesters and pro-Israeli protesters, both on the same side here. You'll see both kind of intermix in here, but they are giving the disbursement order and asking people to leave peacefully. Still no arrest yet. And one thing we could say is since the law enforcement presence has been here, we have not seen the clash between the two groups. No longer are they trying to discombobulate this whole structure that they had here. They're not tearing it away and not running away. At that time, we saw the group throwing things at each other. There was a number of weapons being used to hit and throw at each other. We've not seen that since the law enforcement presence has arrived on scene. So that is good to see. Once again, you'll see CHP has a skirmish line. You'll see the supervisors walking along the back of the skirmish line, just keeping everybody informed, making sure everybody knows what's going on. You see for a minute there, it was quite a wide area that they were covering, and now they've begun to just kind of hone it down and get a little closer, and they are pushing everybody to the west side of the quad, where they're allowing them to leave through a corridor without being arrested. So again, so far, no arrests being made. LAPD, CHP, large contingency of officers here at UCLA in the quad. What are we looking like for fuel, Tyler? Got it. The mid gets there at 4, so I'm pretty sure they'll put them up, and then we'll be good. We'll be able to, yeah, we'll be able to shake and bake, and that way we can go back and get Scott. Okay, here's CHP. Now again, moving forward a little bit, very methodical, very strategic, very poised. They are just pushing the group to the west side of the quad and closing in as they move in. They started across the whole quad and now basically have made a smaller and smaller circle as they get closer to clearing the quad. Also with the support of LAPD. See LAPD now moving in and backing up their initial line. So if I go back and look out here, there's still that contingency of LAPD officers holding the beginning of the quad. And here we are again, LAPD holding the contingency, and there we see it again. CHP very slowly and methodically just closing in on this group. So here we go again. We've seen a number of these conversations pop up amongst the groups, between both groups. And it seems like every time those conversations happen, it begins to more or less just disengage a lot of the members there. They're treating each other with respect for the most part, and they conversate and then move back. So what will happen here is we've seen it as this gets closer and closer, we're going to see most of the counter protesters or protesters be moved into an area where they're no longer going to be able to have a conflict with each other because they'll essentially be separated. And again, CHP moving in very methodically. But still giving everybody an out. Still letting them walk along this corridor. You could see the line of CHP officers here that are not blocking the way out. So they're allowing people to leave. I'm looking at other areas of the quad where there's groups of individuals or people still camping. People are still in certain areas that aren't affected kind of by the clash between the two groups. And most of the people have just been here at the quad. And I see this is kind of where CHP has met their goal. They've cleared most of the quad. They're creating some separation in between each other to make sure they hold this line. And here you can see CHP is very tight here. They're almost like there's two groups sandwiched in between each other, and they're trying to get in there. And CHP is making a positive push. They're taking the steps, and they're pushing this group away from each other. And you can see the makeshift barriers that I spoke about earlier that were being torn down. And their goal was to clear the quad, and they're making that goal effective at this point. Here we are again, CHP, LAPD, all on standby here. And from the time when we got here earlier, there were just basically little sporadic moments of violence where people were fighting. And that's at least stopped since the show of force has happened. We haven't seen that same little bit of violence erupt here. They're just very methodically pushing this remaining group out of the quad area and trying to get them to disperse to create some period of separation between the two groups to stop the fighting between the two. And again, if you're just joining us, this is live coverage of UCLA. CHP and LAPD now intervening in the protests that were happening on the campus of UCLA, both between groups of pro-Palestinian and pro-Israeli groups that erupted in violence earlier tonight. And a show of force between CHP and LAPD has kind of quelled that violence, and they are now creating some separation between the two groups to stop the fighting that was occurring. And we've gotten to a point here where they've pushed this group of demonstrators into this corner, and they're trying to get them to disperse along this corridor here. And some of them are still just maintaining where they want to stay. Let's push a little bit to the west, Tyler, just so I can see both ends of it. this here? Just a tiny bit here, thank you. Yeah, that's good. I just wanted to see what we were looking at on the other end here. Still see LAPD, still have CHP, and they're still maintaining that corridor where they're letting people walk out. Yeah, they confirmed they'll be there at 4. Got it. We'll be all set. Yeah, we should have enough fuel for that. The big question here is you see LAPD and CHP removing a group of the protests, but the elephant in the room going to be, what are they going to do with this encampment? How are they going to handle that? I don't anticipate them removing this entrenched encampment throughout the morning. So we're going to have to see what's going to happen with the number of tents here that are going to remain on the campus and the plan later on to remove that. I anticipate a long morning ahead of us, at least for now, with separation of the two groups. The violence or the clashes between them has stopped, and so that's great to see. Still no arrest, and still CHP doing what they're doing here is just pushing the group further and further off the quad. Got it. Well, here comes another group of CHP officers to reinforce that first group. They're moving around a little bit, and they're going to come and actually push the rest of this group. Is their plan. They're trying to push this group out peacefully to separate the two groups. And just a quick look, we we still see a number of law enforcement officers continuing to pour in. As I mentioned before, LAPD, CHP, and also LA County Sheriffs. And the LA County Sheriffs have a contingency, but it seems like they are just waiting to make sure and see what is going to happen with the current situation. We see a big force of LAPD officers more or less just supporting the CHP effort at this point. And there's also a mix of UCLA's public safety department in there as well. So large law enforcement presence, you see them now. There's a number of strategy missions going on and talking, and they are just trying to resolve this as peacefully as possible. Here again, another group of CHP officers being deployed near the front of the line here. Okay, here's CHP's pushing through and now moving people throughout to try to push them out of this area. You can see a large group that was standing there kind of just waiting, now exiting the quad area. CHP just strengthening their lines here. Still no arrest scene. You still see a number of supporters or number of this group still on this side of the tents. And remember, they've created a makeshift barrier in between here with plywood and barriers and pallets. So the barrier still stands. It was about an hour ago or so, there was a number of pieces of that barrier that were being torn away or torn down. And there was a number of counter protesters or protesters taking them over here and dumping it and just trying to break down the barrier as much as they could. However, that has now stopped since the presence of law enforcement has arrived on scene and the clashes between the two groups have stopped. So the entrenched encampment, the pro-Palestinian side of this event, is still here. They're still on this side with a number of tents and a number of, basically fortified their area, you could see, with pallets and just anything that could be found. And here we have CHP closing out the gap. Like mentioned before, they're letting people disperse on their own through this corridor, and now they've circled the gap. They've come all the way down, they've cleared the quad, and now they're pushing people back to the south to just clear the quad altogether. They've also have a line or a skirmish line, a contingency, blocking off the entrances back into the quad. So we've seen CHP methodically come through this quad and hold their line. Very peaceful. No arrests being made, no clashes between the law enforcement officers and protesters. They're just very slowly pushing people out of the quad and separating the two groups. Yeah, perfect, Tyler. See a number of CHP and LAPD officers still continuing to move in groups. You could see they were prepared to make arrests. Those big white bundles you see at their waist are plastic handcuffs used often in these situations. And here they are just pushing that group through the quad and backfilling and supporting, just keeping it closed down. Copy that, and just been told by the booth that if you're joining us here live on ABC 7 and ABC streaming channels, on the right side of your screen you see a live ground shot courtesy of Reuters, and on the left side of the screen you see us up here in Air 7 with continuous coverage over the situation unfolding at UCLA. LAPD and CHP officers doing the best they can to disperse the two entities or separate the two crowds of protesters from each other as peacefully as they can. And just as they come around, we'll give them a couple minutes. They're being blocked on my shot by a tree, but we will shortly come in and see where CHP's goal was to enter the quad and peacefully use the skirmish line just to push the protesters out of the quad. As I said earlier, you see a line of officers lining this walkway here. They're using this walkway as an exit to the quad, and they're slowly but surely just pushing the protesters out of the quad along that way so they could set a space or area between the two protesters. Yeah, perfect. Yep. And we're gonna move around. A little weather coming in here. Big thanks to my pilot, Tyler, doing a great job early here. Thanks for joining us. And as before mentioned, here's the CHP skirmish line, and this is the last group of pro-Israeli protesters that were on this side, that they're just making space between the two groups. And you can see very slowly but methodically, CHP has done an excellent job of just maintaining the peace and just moving people out of the way rather than any signs of force or any signs of people getting arrested. It's more just create space between the two groups to stop any of the conflict that was happening between the two groups. And here's a good shot of what I was talking about earlier. Here's the makeshift barrier that was created with all types of different construction materials, pallets, there's a number of just stanchions there, plywood material, whatever can be found that was utilized to create a barrier between the two groups. That was just being picked up and thrown earlier, well, just a couple hours ago when we were seeing this live on ABC, and we had coverage of the two groups that actually erupted in a bit of conflict and violence between the two. And you see a mix of CHP and UCLA PD or UCLA public safety members down there. There was a question that came about earlier, why the CHP? UCLA is a state school, so ultimate law enforcement or authority will fall in lines for the CHP. And so that's why you see CHP active on the campus. But they are being supported by LAPD. You'll see LAPDs down here in the black uniforms, CHP wearing the tan uniforms, and the LAPD has a big force of uniformed personnel here supporting the CHP efforts as the CHP continues to clear this area. Once again, this is the last piece of the contingency that was left on the quad, and CHP has met their goal. Initially, when we first got on scene, we came on a few hours ago just to try to keep with this continuous coverage. There was a clash here where the two groups met, and since then, CHP has come in and created the space on the quad in between the two groups, and essentially just escorted the group out and created a barrier between the two to stop any forms of violence. And now you can see LAPD contingency right behind them and just reinforcing those skirmish lines to make sure that everybody is just moving out here. Again, let me show you the number of law enforcement officers that are here at UCLA is quite impressive. Just as I said that, you could see in our ground shot just there was some shots of those actual ground units that were lined up along the outskirts here. And you see a big contingency of officers. The officer you just saw on your right-hand screen with less lethal force, none of that has been used here. Yet to see any tear gas or any forms of crowd control measures, anything like that. It's just been a series of movement of people through a show of force. And as you can see, LAPD has now reinforced that skirmish line, and they have kept the people out of the quad, and CHP is now falling back and reconciling their units to see where they could be to push the people out of the quad area. And now LAPD has reinforced that line, and now everybody has exited the quad, as that was their plan from the start tonight, to just try to create some space and create some peace in between the two groups. I got it. It'll probably be a clean handoff. You know, they'll get up at 4, and then right when they come, so we should be able to. We'll try to hold out until we just flip-flop. Yeah, it's right over Hollywood. So kind of like K-Joy. Yeah. And back with us out here live at UCLA, you could see still what CHP has done is cleared the quad of all protesters on this side. This was the pro-Israeli side. The pro-Palestinian side of this conflict or this protest are encamped in these tents here. And you see a contingency of LAPD holding down one side of the quad. You see LAPD and CHP holding down the other side of the quad. The goal was to come in and clear this quad area to stop the conflict between the two groups. And we've watched that methodically happen over the last hour. The last group of people we see still here are in this corner where they're still kind of in discussion. LAPD has reinforced this area, CHP has pulled back, but still a large contingency of officers from CHP, LAPD, as well as UCLA's Public Safety Department. And you see a number of people just chanting and talking still, but no arrests that we've seen yet. The officers were all here, ready to go, and we have yet to see any arrests. And still a large contingency of officers off camera that we've seen preparing to come in just in case they were needed. Yeah, I think we could stay here for that. What do you think, Tyler, about 15 minutes on station? Yeah, about 15 minutes on station we could do from now. So about 4:05, we'll need to start walking out. And here you see, like mentioned in the tan, these are CHP officers. They're now reinforcing the line behind LAPD as well. And they're just keeping people out of this quad. Yeah, go ahead. We could save a little fuel. We're still the only ones here. Live continuous coverage. As we get closer to the morning, I've seen a lot more activity here in the encampment. They actually have food set up. They're heavily entrenched in there, so you see a lot more movement going on that side, and you see this area just now completely clear. And excuse us as we orbit through this little bit of fog here, a little bit of marine layer coming on here to the Westwood area. Very interesting. Now we see the main line of officers. Basically, they're now rotating. I hear them on their frequency here, where they're going to now CHP will step in, give the LAPD officers a bit of a break or a breather, and so you're going to see this rotate through with a number of these officers that are holding these skirmish lines. So you saw LAPD now walking back and taking a break while CHP moved in to support and fill those positions, just holding this whole quad area. And again, showing you here's a number of the building materials that were stripped away from that area in between where people were at earlier. And all those building materials were being grabbed and picked up and taken back to an area. So you could see initially this was highly fortified with a number of building materials. It has since been torn down in a number of areas in an attempt to break this barrier between the two groups. So majority of it's still up and still in place. And there we see, again, LAPD contingency just holding all access to this quad from anybody entering. You can keep it a little bit wider, Tyler. Got it. Still streaming, and we'll be live at the top of the 4. Got it, got it. And those of you still with us here, all of our streaming platforms on ABC, we're still here with live continuous coverage over UCLA. We're getting into our 4 o'clock hour. We'll be live on ABC and abc.com. So thank you for staying with us, and we'll be with you back live on TV. Let's try to get back over there a little quicker, just because we're going to be live in a minute or so. And, copy. Good right here. Just hold it till they come off this story, and then we'll jam. Gabe, we're going to head back to Van Nuys for fuel.